Good evening. What unfolded inside Russia over the past 72 hours is something no one in Washington, no one in NATO, and frankly no one in Moscow's traditional circle of observers fully anticipated. It is the kind of step a great power takes, not when it feels strong and comfortable, but when it feels cornered, pressured, and determined to change the strategic picture in its favor. Russia has taken a move so unexpected, so strategically disruptive that it caught the United States off guard in a way we have not seen since the early days of the Cold War. And the consequences of this move will reshape every calculation the Pentagon makes, every assumption NATO has held, and every model analysts use to predict Russian behavior. Because what Russia has done is not symbolic, not rhetorical, not minor, and not reversible. It is a shift that changes the balance of power in Europe and signals that Moscow is preparing for a long, dangerous phase of confrontation that could define the next decade. The first signs of this move appeared not on television or social media, but deep inside the intelligence channels that track Russia's most sensitive military activity. For weeks, US analysts saw odd behavior. Russian units that typically remain stationary suddenly moving without public announcement. Rail convoys transporting equipment usually buried in hardened storage. Satellite heat signatures showing facilities active at unusual hours. None of these alone meant anything shocking, but the patterns didn't match seasonal training. They didn't match Russia's previous mobilizations. They didn't match preparation for simple rotation of forces. Something else was happening, something bigger. And then, almost overnight, Russia took the step that changed everything. It repositioned a critical segment of its strategic deterrent forces into locations and configurations that drastically alter the balance of risk for the United States and NATO. What Russia moved wasn't just equipment. It was a category of assets the Kremlin normally hides, protects, and reveals only in moments of extreme geopolitical tension. Russia repositioned advanced mobile missile systems, systems designed not for battlefield use in Ukraine, but for long-range strategic deterrence against NATO. These systems were moved closer to Russia's western edge, integrated into new command structures, and placed under readiness protocols inconsistent with routine posturing. At the same time, Russia expanded the dispersion of its strategic strike assets across remote regions, making them harder to track, harder to target, and harder for the United States to assess accurately. This combination, forward movement of certain systems and dispersion of others, is one of the most alarming patterns a great power can display. It signals preparation. It signals calculation. It signals that Russia wants to increase uncertainty for the United States at a moment when Washington believed it had a clear picture of Moscow's capabilities. From a realist lens, the lens I use to evaluate every major strategic shift, this move makes perfect sense. Russia believes it is in an existential struggle. It believes the United States and NATO are committed to weakening it, containing it, isolating it, and bleeding it on the Ukrainian battlefield. Moscow does not see the current conflict as localized or regional. It sees it as the latest chapter in a larger encirclement campaign dating back to the collapse of the Soviet Union. And when a great power feels that combination of threat and opportunity, it takes steps that are not polite, not predictable, not comforting, but rational in the harsh logic of power. It changes the strategic map. It increases leverage. It injects uncertainty. It forces its adversaries to reconsider escalation. What makes this move so important is not simply where Russia placed its assets, but how it did it. The movements were executed quietly, efficiently, with far more discipline than many Western analysts believed Russia still possessed. After 2 years of heavy losses in Ukraine, many assumed that Russia's capacity for coordinated large-scale repositioning had been degraded, but this operation proved the opposite. The Kremlin retains deep control over the elements of its military that matter most for long-term confrontation with the West. Its conventional forces may be battered, but its strategic forces remain intact, mobile, and capable of rapid reconfiguration. When US intelligence realized what Russia had repositioned and how, Washington shifted into a defensive analysis mode that we have not seen in years. The Pentagon demanded new projections. The National Security Council held emergency briefings. The intelligence community began modeling scenarios that had not been seriously considered since the early 2000s. And NATO's military planners, particularly those in Eastern Europe, quietly elevated their alert posture. Publicly, nothing was said. Silence is often the loudest signal during moments of great power tension. But behind the scenes, the United States understands that Russia is not simply posturing. It is signaling a readiness to operate under a much more dangerous set of assumptions. The United States expected Russia to continue fighting in Ukraine, to mobilize new brigades, to push on multiple fronts, and to rely heavily on attritional warfare. What the United States did not expect was a move that expands the confrontation beyond the Ukrainian battlefield and into the larger strategic arena. By repositioning these systems, Russia is effectively telling Washington, "You cannot pressure us indefinitely without consequences. If you escalate, we escalate in areas you are not prepared for." This is classic deterrent signaling, but executed in a way that complicates U.S. response options. America now faces a dilemma. If it increases pressure on Russia in Ukraine, Moscow may escalate outside Ukraine. If the United States retaliates by repositioning its own strategic forces, that risks a dangerous arms race spiral. And if the US hesitates, Russia gains leverage across multiple domains. This is where the structural reality of great power politics becomes unavoidable. The United States and Russia are locked in a rivalry over the European security order, and in any rivalry between nuclear-armed giants, perception matters more than intention. Russia does not have to threaten the United States directly. It simply has to alter American perception of risk. And that is exactly what Russia has done. It has created uncertainty about how far it is willing to go, how available its strategic forces really are, and how quickly it can escalate if pushed. Now consider the ripple effects. NATO states along the eastern flank, Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Romania, are suddenly facing a strategic environment in which Russia's long-range assets are positioned more aggressively. They are pressuring Washington for assurances, for deployments, for air defense expansions, for missile shield reinforcements. But every additional U.S. deployment brings risks of its own. If the United States pushes systems too close to Russia, Moscow will interpret it as preparation for offensive capability, and then Russia will counter. That counter will trigger another U.S. counter, and gradually, unintentionally, the two sides drift toward a crisis neither side originally wanted. This is the tragedy of great power competition. It creates conditions where escalation becomes the default, not the exception, and Russia's unexpected move accelerates that dynamic. From Moscow's perspective, this was necessary. Russia believes it cannot survive in a Europe dominated by NATO power. From Washington's perspective, Russia's move is destabilizing because it erodes the predictability that underpins strategic planning. And when predictability erodes, miscalculation becomes far more likely. Here is the part most people fail to understand. Russia does not believe it is losing, it believes it is adapting. The Kremlin views itself as under siege and sees every military repositioning as a way to prevent strategic defeat. This is how great powers think when they believe their survival is at stake. And the United States, in turn, now has to decide how to manage this shift without triggering a confrontation that spirals beyond control. Washington cannot ignore Russia's move, but it cannot overreact either. It must respond in a way that maintains deterrence without crossing the invisible threshold that pushes Russia into even more aggressive posturing. This is a delicate balance, one the United States has not had to manage at this level of intensity in decades, and the stakes could not be higher. Russia has just shown that it is willing to expand the confrontation beyond the borders of Ukraine. It has demonstrated that it retains the capability to surprise the West. It has revealed that its strategic forces are far more agile than many assumed, and it has sent a message that the United States cannot dismiss. Moscow will not allow itself to be strategically cornered. If pressured, it will escalate. If isolated, it will expand its range. If threatened, it will move assets in ways that complicate American planning. This is the new phase of the conflict, one where the battlefield is not just Ukraine, one where the tensions are not just political, one where the consequences are not just regional. Russia took a step no one expected, and the United States has been forced to confront a new, more dangerous reality. This story is not ending, it is only beginning.